Baruchim Aboim B'Shem Yeh. You should tell like a big Baruchim Aboim to everyone. And today's shir of Rabbi Yakov Zev Smith, Shlit on Luisir de Boy Beforech. Whoever like to have the great schus of sponsoring a shir, call Irgun Shir Torah at 718-851-8651.
Someone once saw a sign in a shul that you must return the svarim after use. If you don't put back your svarim and you make the gabbai do it, you're over on a deraisa of Luisir de Boy Beforech. So the truth is there are enough reasons to put back svarim, but this was a little more intimidating, Oivan alav. But the person said, this is ridiculous. The pasuk Leisir Dabei Befarach is talking about an Eved. What does that have to do with a Gabbai Svarim? Recently I heard a different shaila about Leisir Dabei. Unfortunately, because of the situation of COVID, many people weren't able to do their regular work. So their employers wanted them to do different work. Lamashal, a Rebbe wasn't able to teach in the beginning. So the Anhala wanted him to do some fundraising, make some phone calls. And there was a question, is that Leisir Dabei Befarach? Now, this is an interesting sugya because many people never heard of this law of Leisir Dabei Befarach. And yet after we learn the sugya properly, which is always the right thing to do, we'll see not only the geshmak of the sugya, but how important it is to learn Chumash. It involves 3 or maybe 4 psukim in the Torah, and hopefully we'll have the Siyat Dishmai that it all fits in like a beautiful puzzle. And the Sefer Chassidim writes that if there's a mitzvah that's a meis mitzvah that's neglected, you should talk about it. I think this is worse than a meis mitzvah because no one even knows it's a mitzvah. Not that they neglected, they're not even aware of it. So let's learn the sugya properly. We'll learn a few psukim in Chumash, and then hopefully we'll have the information to apply it lamaisa. We find in Parshas Bahar, Perek Chavches, Pasuk Lam Betes, Chiyamach achicha imach v'nimkalach. If someone is very poor and he's what we call he's meicher atzmai, he's an eved ivri, and now you have an eved ivri, leisavad boy avoidas oved. Don't work with your eved avoidas oved. Now that's very strange. If I bought him and I paid good money for it, why can't I work with it and have benefit? So the emphasis that's not pshat in the word avoidas oved. Zok Taras Kahanim. Rashi quotes it, Avodah shel Genai. The issa is don't demean, don't humiliate the Eved. Shia nikaba ke'eved. What does that mean? Layelech kelev achrav lebeis hamerchatz. I'll give a better mashal. Today, if you're going to the mikveh, don't make him carry your soap and towel and your brush. He shouldn't carry your stuff to the beis hamerchatz. He shouldn't have to put on your shoes. This is based on Teres Kahanim, Perek Zayin, Ois Beis. In other words, maybe you're allowed to work with him. Of course he has to work. But don't humiliate him. And of course, putting on someone else's shoes or carrying a mikveh bag is considered a gnai. The emes is, this is a lav min haTorah. Where did Rashi get the mashal of putting on shoes that's not in Teres Kahanim? So you might probably familiar in Ksubas Daf Tzadik Vav and Kedushin Chav Beis Amad Beis in 2 different contexts. The Gemara says that Spitz Avdus is when someone puts on your shoes. That shows he's an Eved. We'll soon see that's an indication that he's an Eved. So Rashi assumed that would be included in Avodas Oved. So l'chayr you're allowed to work with him, but not humiliate him. There's a beautiful chinuch in Mitzvah Shin Mem Dalid. He says, what's takab shat? Is a lav min haTorah to make an eved carry your mikveh bag or put on your shoes? So he says a beautiful insight. This is teaching us that a yid is different than a guy. There's an eved kanani, you're allowed to do what you want. But a yid is different. And if you treat an eved because you realize that this is a fellow yid, I guess you'll treat other yid properly also. Even an eved, koshken a yid. Then he says, don't forget, the world is a galgal achayza, and maybe Chalila tomorrow, you'll be the Yehaved, so you better be nice today. And then he says something, it's a training in Midas. Because Achzarius is so terrible. And how about treating my spouse and treating my neighbor? Even an Evan Ivri I have to treat with silk gloves. But be that as it may, let me be very clear. This is a lav min haTorah to treat your Eved like an Eved. The Sefer Mitzvahs, the Rambam, the Chinuch, Yereim, the Smag, All the Meinei mitzvahs count this as one of the Taryag mitzvahs. Someone that makes his Eved carry his stuff to the mikveh, he's Oivan Alav Min HaTorah. The Chinuch adds, why is there no Malkus? Because the Lav She'ein B'I Mais is only a Dibur. The Minchas Chinuch says, well, not all agree, Lav She'ein B'I Mais ain't liking. Maybe because since it's Dover HaMosel L'Leiv, as we'll soon see, it's not sure what your Kavan is, so maybe you can give Malkus. But this is Pasik Lamed Tes, you can't work with an Eved Avodas Eved. But we're not yet finished. A few psukim later, Pasik Mem Gimel, again talking to a Yid with his Eved Ivri. Lo sirda b'ay b'farech, v'yareisam aleikecha. You can't work with your Eved Avodas Perech. Now the word Perech we're very familiar with. We have it in Mitzrayim, we speak about it on Pesach. Back-breaking work, like the Metzudas Taiches in Yecheskel Lamed Vav, Avoida kosha mafareches u'meshaberes es haguf. But that's not the pshat here. Avoidas perech has a different taich. Again, Rashi, quoting the Toras Kehanim, Avoidas perech means malachish shaloi l'tzoyrach kedei la'noisai. You're paying for the Eved, and it's a slow time, there's nothing for him to do. So you tell him, it's a shot, the girls work for me. Cook me up a cup of water, but you don't really need it. That's also awesome. Or Rashi has a second mashal, also based on Toras Kehanim. Ador tachas hagefen at she'avai. I want you to start working, start hoeing, until I tell you to stop. What's wrong with that? Why is that avodas perach? So the Rambam explains, Hilchos Avodim Perek Aleph, Halacha Vav, because that's an avodah she'ein la kitzva. You tell him to work for an hour, 2, 3, so he has certain, feelings when it's going to end. But tell him to work indefinitely, that is emotionally straining. If I give a mashal, the more Ksubas Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Beis says, Hakosh she'ein la soif, something that's endless is worse than Misa. A person has to suffer, he knows there's an end to it. But Pasik, there are 2 Isurim in how to treat an Eved Ivri. It's possible you're allowed to make him work hard. You're paying for that. But the first Issa is Bezoyin. And the second Issa is the emotional pain of making him work either for no reason or to work endlessly. The Ravid says, I have a different shot, you tell him to work until I come back, and then you take your time coming back. But it's the same idea. You're dealing with a Yid, and don't do more than necessary. Whether it's the Gnai or the emotional pain. But look at the end of this pasuk. V'yareisa melokecha. So Rashi again quoting the Toras Kehanim, you'll say, I don't really mean so bad. Zok the Bereshit, I know what you mean. V'yareisa melokecha. It's almost like the Bereshit saying, you think you're starting up with him? You're starting up with me. I'm the Gadol Oimed Al Gabav. I'm going to watch his covet. You're playing with fire. We don't find this by every lav, but here you're dealing with another Yid. The Bereshit saying, you're starting up with me. This reminds me what I heard from a good friend of mine. Probably he told me this 40 years ago, but I still left the Roshim. He was learning in Panovich at the time, and there was a lot of problems from the Arabs, terrorist bombings and attacks. It was terrible. So Rav Shach got up and spoke in Panovich. He heard it. Rav Shach was very emotional. He was very frightened to say what he wanted to say. But he said there's a Ramban in Parshas Lech Lecha. We just learned it the other week. Zok the Ramban, and Rav Shach preceded these words by saying you have to be a Ramban to say this. But Chata imenu be'inu izeh. Sarah Madrigasa did something wrong by torturing Hagar. V'gam Avram ba'nicha lasis kach. Avram should have protested. He was also wrong. V'shama Hashem al Anya. V'nasan ben shia pera adam. She gave Hagar a child, or many children, pera adams. Lana izera Avram v'sar b'chol mineho inui. Every tear and every drop of blood and every shed of tears that Yidden have been crying for Darius because of Arabs is because Sarai mistreated Hagar. And Linyanenu, it's unbelievable. Hagar was a Shivcha Kananis. It was her possessions. But look how the Rebbe Shem is careful even with an Evet Kanani. And how about an Evet Ivri? And how about another Yid who's not an Evet? That's a little introduction into this sugya. Treat another Yid, even an Evet. Kol Shkein a Yisrael. The Chizkuni, one of the Rishonim, points out why you have to have two psukim, Lamed Dalet, Lamed Tes, Mem Gimel, because it's Ovain Zeh Motzli, because it's very common. We could add it's two different problems. One is the Gnai, and one is the emotional distress. Okay, I must mention the Yereim, one of the Balei HaTosis, in Siman Kuf Tzadik Tes. He has a different shot on Avodas Perach. A day job be done by day, or a day job being done at night, which we're also familiar with. The Gemara in Soita, Daf Yud Aleph Mabei says in Mitzrayim, that was part of their fiendish plan to break Eden, give them opposite works. So that's also Avodas Perach. You know, I learned this sugya, I was thinking, so maybe Taka Avodas Perach Kipshutai, hard work is mutter. That's what an Evet is for. So I looked in the Rishonim, I found two Rishonim, the Miri and Kedushin Chav Beis and Beis, and the Rashbam on this pasuk, they Taka say Avodas Perach is Kipshutai. But the other Rishonim seem to learn that maybe that's not so bad. You know what's worse? Mistreating emotionally or without respect. But be that as it may, this is the Issa of Leisir Debay, two Lavim. The message is, for us, it's not being Adam Le'eved, it's training and treating people. And this reminds me of what I once pointed out. I made a cheshbon. There are 16 places in the Torah where the Torah speaks about how a Yid has to treat an animal. Mahavdul. What is this, the ASPCA? 16 times the Torah about animals. So if you look in the Chinuch, in Reish Tzadik Dalet, and in Tafkuf Mem Hey, the Chinuch says it's not respect for the animals, it's training us in Midas. You have to treat an animal with respect, or avoid torturing an animal. Oisiv es benoi, you're thoughtful for the animal's feelings. Kol shkein, you'll treat another Yid properly. So I think the chinuch l'shitasei regarding animals and regarding avodim is one and the same. It's a lesson, it's a therapy in treating people with respect. This reminds me of another Rambam. The Rambam, the end of Hilchas Avodim, says that really lahalacha, a Yid who has an Evet Kanani, a goy, nachtetzu, could work with him avodas perach. The sky's the limit. You can do what you want. But then the Rambam goes on to say how Yidden typically treat an Evet Kanani. If you look at the Rambam, you would say, I wish people treat their wives the way you're supposed to treat an Evet Kanani. Such respect, talk to them nicely, and you know, listen to them. The pasuk in the Torah, and all of a sudden we treat him like a king. So the Rambam, you know why? Because Zari shel Avram v'heim Yisrael sheshpi alam HaKadosh Baruch Hu toivas ha-Torah. We have a Torah HaKadosha that makes us act differently, way beyond the letter of the law. And we have Torah mitzvahs, and we try to emulate the Rebbe Shlomo's ways. You know, there's something called toivas ha-Torah that's mechayiv a person to live b'darchei noyam, because Torah is darchei noyam. Torah is the essence. Jana just washed the floor, and a bacha walks on the wet floor. I look at him, I says, like, what are you doing? He says, it's a guy. I says, but you're a Yid. You have a Torah HaTorah. That's what this Rambam is saying, and that's what the Chinuch is saying. That's what the whole Torah is really teaching us. You're a Yid, you have Torah HaTorah. So if we see it by Behemoth and by an Eved, and even Eved Kanani, and how about one's spouse and one's neighbor, halavai, we take this message to heart. But this is all Leisir Debay Befarech regarding an Eved Ivri. Now the question that we're waiting for is very nice, Eved Ivri. What does that have to do with me and the Gabbai Svarim? If I might leave my safe on the table, he's not an Eved. Why is that Leisir Debay Befarech? And the emes is the Teres Kehanim in Zayin Beis, Dover Acha, Leisir Debay Befarech, Boy Ein Ata Oiver Avoidas Eved, Aval Oiver Ata Beven Choyren Avoidas Eved. Verkehrt. With the regular, you're allowed to work with him the way you want. You're allowed to mistreat him. The Rambam in Perek Aleph Halacha Zayin spells it out. When is there an Issa by an Eved? But by a regular person, you're allowed to do what you want. So it seems like the Rambam, that with a worker, you can make him do whatever you want. So you could tell the worker to do this or that, and you could leave the Svarm on the table. The Gabi Svarm is no Issa, he's not an Eved. Out. These Isurim are only Naheges Bizman that an Eved was Naik. Today we don't have these Isurim. So Aibazai with the Gabi Svarm or the worker, you're okay. So we have early dismissal today. Ibayis Eima Kra, Ibayis Eima Svar. First of all, in Svar, it can't be that with an Eved Ivri of 2 lavim, that is the treatment of Ganai or emotional distress, that's awesome. But with another Yid, there's no Issa. It doesn't make sense. Maybe it's a Kal V'choima. Even by an Eved is also Kolshkin by a Yid. But I could say Yiboy Yisei Makra. Because here we come to the third piece of this puzzle, the third pasuk. 3 psukim later, the same parsha. Visnachaltem oisim levneichem achreichem l'reshes achuza. This talking about an Eved Kanani. He's yours forever. Then the pasuk says la'olam behem tavoidu. Famous. An Eved Kanani forever. Whether it's machlokes, is it a chiyuv or reshus, but with an Eved Kanani, it's forever. Then the next words, uvacheichem b'nei Yisrael, this is a regular yid l'chayra, ish ba'achiv lo'isir debay b'farach. This is the third time we have this lav of lo'isir debay b'farach. Once Eved, Perach, and now second time at Perach. The question is, what is this pasuk talking about? Uvacheichem b'nei Yisrael. So Rashi, lahavi nasi ba'amav umelach b'misharsav. So lir dais b'farach. This pasuk is talking about a nasi, a president, and a melech. That's interesting. Rashi has no makar for this. It's not a mechil. It's not a Teres Kehanim. I saw the Masis Binyamin is Pirish Nachlas Yaakov on Chumash asked where Rashi get it from, but Rashi was Rashi, and Rashi says there's a special issa on a nasi ba'amav. Zok the Mizrahi, it's one of the Rishonim, don't forget. Nasi that has an Eved, so Pashit. Why is it not any other Yid? Why do you have to have Pasik Mem Vav, Nasi? What's wrong with Pasik Mem Gimel? Let's do it by Befarech. Zok the Re'em, that Rashi is learning that this Pasik in Pasik Mem Vav, the third Pasik, is talking about, it's not an Eved. A regular Yid with a regular worker, there's a lav deraisa of mistreating him, lo'isir debay b'farach. In other words, Pasuk Lamed Tes is avodas, Eved is awesome. The meaning work. Pasuk Mem Gimel is talking about Vav is talking about me and you. We have a worker or a Gabbai Svarim, or whatever it is, and we're making him work. Or a Gabbai Svarim do something he doesn't want to do. He's not an Eved Ivri, but he's still Pasuk Mem Vav. Acheichem b'nei Yisrael lo'isir debay b'farach. There's a lav of working him without respect. And the emes is, as we'll see, this is not just a chiddush that some say. This is quoted by Gedolei HaPoiskim, Gedolei Rishonim, in many, many places. And I'll give you an earlier source, which l'chayr, when you learn it, you'll appreciate it more. But l'chayr it's a Beferish Gemara. Now listen to an interesting Gemara. It's a very interesting story, I must admit. The Gemara says in Bav Metzia Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, Rav Sa'oram Achvu de Rava. Rava had a brother, Rav Sa'oram. You find him in Ma'it Katan also. And he did something very interesting. Havitokav Inshi Deloi Maili. He took some people, we'll give them a nice term, they were far from perfect. Anshe B'nei Bli Al. And Uma'aylu biguharka de Rava. Rava, his brother, was the Gadol Hador, and obviously he wanted to show respect to his brother, so he took his chariot, and instead of attaching horses to pull Rava, he took these Bnei Belial, and they became the human horses to schlep his brother Rava. So that attracted some attention, what's going on here? So Rava up to Gemara, defended his brother. Amalei Rava shapeka avarte. Don't worry, my brother knows what he's doing. The Tanina, Reisa she'eina noya keshura. If you see a person that's not acting properly, minayin shater shoy l'shtabed boy. How do you know you're allowed to work with him? Avoidas perach, avoidas redia. Listen to this. Talmud laim l'olam em tavoidu uvacheichem. You're allowed to work with an Evet Kanani any way you want, and also your brother. Yachol, afil noya keshura. And let's say you have a nice gabay svarm or a nice worker. Maybe you could also do what you want? No. Talmud laim uvacheichem b'nei Yisrael ish ba'achiv loisir debay b'farach. Rabbi said, I didn't make up this Gemara. It's a Gemara. But Matzia and Gimel my base. I mean, the whole story with Rava's brother. But the way the Gemara learns, Zakta Me'iri on that Gemara, a Dava Niflamoid. There are two different thoughts. Lailamam Tavaidu, Evet Kanani. There's a word in between Acheichem. And then we find Bnei Yisrael, Ish Ba'achav, Zib B'farach. And the Gemara is learning something unusual. The word of Acheichem goes both ways. If you have an Inchi Delay Maili, you could treat him like an Evet Kanani. All halachas are suspended. A regular Yid, Loisir Debay B'farach. You ever see a word that goes both ways? But wait, you haven't seen anything yet. The Goyin, quote in the Panir Rabbeinu Hagra, wonders that on the word Uvacheichem, there are two trups. In fact, some Chumashim, it says on the asterisk, Beis Taimim, doesn't mean two reasons. It means two trups. There's a pashta and then a mapach. Usually it's fakir, mapach, pashta. It's a pashta and a mapach. Why two trups and why in the different order? So the guy in Kedarka, he says, this is the neflois our Torah. The word pashta usually goes backwards. So uvacheichem has a pashta that tells you that word goes back to Elamam Tavoidu. But then mapach, you know, mapach means goes forward. And the truth is, if you ever remember, if you have an old tape recorder, forward is always the way the mapach looks, going that way. So the word vacheichem goes pashta the other way and mapach that way. So this is a Gemara. But you know what comes out from this Gemara? That there's a lavman HaTorah based on pasuk memvav, the third pasuk, to mistreat another yid. There's a heta by inchi deloy mali. And that's why, as we'll see, many Rishonim say that the two psukim are talking about Evet Kanani, but pasuk memvav is going on another yid. And the Chassam Sofer will soon see in the context in Kuf Samach Tes in the Gilyon and Archaim, he quotes the Magen Avram that says no issa by a regular yid, and he goes tzarich iyin gadol from the Gemara in Sugya. Different points, and now you'll understand a often quoted Rabbeinu Yoin in Shari Tshuva, in Shar Gimel Oy Samach. He quotes Uvacheichem b'nei Yisrael. He quotes the third pasuk. Lo yishtabed adam b'chaverei. Don't make someone work when he doesn't want to do it. Ve'emei masi aleim oy shem boishim lahachel dvarav. Lo yitzave oisam laseis ketana oy gedoyle el ritzoyna b'tayaltam. Zokte Rabbeinu Yoina, don't ask a yid to do something for you if he can't refuse, because effectively you're forcing him to do it. And even if it's a kleinikite, ketana, l'mashal warming up water, Zakt ben Yaina, that's the pshat in the Issa, loisir debay b'farach. In other words, nothing to do with an Evet. If you ask someone and he could say no, so he decides to say yes, it's fine. But this person can't say no, you're over loisir debay. But you know what's masik mitvash? Which pasuk does Ben Yaina cite as a source for the Issa of asking another Yid, who's not an Evet, to do something for you? Look at the Ben Yaina. He quotes pasuk memvav uvacheichem b'nei Yisrael, because that's the way you learn the parsha properly. The first two psukim talk about an Evet Ivri. The last pasuk, V'chechem b'nei Yisrael, is going on a regular yid. The Yosef Oimetz, one of the early Achrayim, in page 290, Issa Gadol, the Araisa, he calls it, to ask someone to do something if he can't say no. Someone talking about another yid. He doesn't take no for an answer. I'm not proud of that person. That person might be over like Seder by Befarach. And even if he officially agrees, it's awesome. Because he's not really agreeing mitoiv leiv. The Orchas Sadikim in Sharach Zorius, also a Rishon, says an Ish Yori, a person that's feared, should not ask favors from people because he's forcing them to do it. And he says, like a Ben Yoyne, there's an Issa B'Cheichem B'nei Yisrael L'Sir D'Bay B'Farach. You look in the Shita Mekubetzes in Bav Metzia Nun Testament Beis, quoting a Ritva, that if someone oppresses a ger, one of the three lam, the Gemara says his oiva is Acheichem B'nei Yisrael L'Sir D'B'Farach. Nothing to do with an Eved. And interesting, if you want a little lum, this the Ktsois HaChoishin in the beginning of Kuf Ayin Aleph says if someone has a Chatzi Eved v'Chatzi Ben Chayr, which means there were two shutfim that owned an Eved Kanani, and one of them freed him, the Eved, now he's a Chatzi. So on the day that he's working for you, the master, you can't work with him Avodas Perach. He's an Eved Kanani for you, but since part of him is a Ben Chayrim, Zok Ktsois, you're over on the Issa of L'Sir D'Bay B'Farach. Fregt the Minchas Chinuch Hashin Mem Zayin, what do you mean? Was there no Issa by a regular person? Zokti Kilas Yaakov and Gittin Simon Chav Zayin? Yes, you are. If he does it Miritzoynai, it's okay. But if he can't say no, then you're Oiva L'Sir D'Bay B'Farach. So here we have the Sug in all its beauty. There are two law regarding an Eved, and there's one law regarding a regular Yid. If you want to see more, the Chazaynish in a letter in Beis Peites, someone asked him to do something, and he didn't want to do it. So he says, you should know, for me, it's harder than anything to say no to people. But what you ask me is making me say no, but I'm going to have to say yes because I don't want to say no, and you're going to be Oiv L'Sir D'Bay B'Farach. And he cites a Ben Yoyna. So we have a very good case based on a Gemara, Rishonim, Ben Yoyna, Orchas Sadikim, Re'im, Rashi, Gedolei HaPoskim, we'll soon see others, that even by regular Yid is L'Sir D'Bay B'Farach. The big question is, the Toras Kehanim, and the Rambam says, by a Ben Chayrim there's no Issa. Look again at the Rambam and you'll see there's not a Kasha. The Rambam says there's an Issa L'Sir D'Bay a Evet Ivri, but not by a regular Yid. A regular Yid is not an Eved. He could say no. Zog the Chafetz Chaim in his Pirish on Toras Kehanim, our Toras Kehanim, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky in his Pirish on Masechta Avodim, one of the Svarim that no one even heard of the Masechta he wrote about, but he has a Pirish Masechta Avodim, Perik Bey, Sif Katan Mem Hey, and they both say the same thing. The Rambam is saying, of course, with a regular Yid who could say no and says yes, so he means yes, you're fine. But if someone that he can't say no, so really he's like an Eved that can't say no. So if you'd ask, will you mind doing me the favor, and he's shaking like a leaf, he can't say no, that's the Issa, Loiter Ben Yoyna, of L'Sir D'Bay B'Farach, a Pasuk Mem Vav. So here you have the Sugya, and again, you think about it, people they get upset, I'm not your slave, or you're not my boss. That's the Nakud of the Issa. You ask someone for a favor, he can't say no, so you're forcing him. That's L'Sir D'Bay, that's a Radiyah. I am lording over you, like you say in English. So this is the Sugya, and again, it all fits in beautifully, let's apply it L'Maisa. So first I want to mention, asking a child to do something, do this or else, that's mamish dislav. He's a cotton, so a cotton he can't make kinyanim, but a cotton yeshle boishis, and there's no doubt about it. Asking a cotton if he doesn't want to do it, you're ayvan dislav. Now, he says yes, so that means a ben yoyna. If he doesn't have a choice of saying no, then his yes is not a yes. And the emes is, if you learn Choshen Mishpat, you see this. In Choshen Mishpat, Reish, Hey, Sif, Aleph, and Beis, we find the fundamental difference between Talyu v'Zavin, Zvini, Zvini. But Talyu v'Yohiv, I force you to give me a gift, It's Geneva, Zok, the Sma and Sif Cotton Ches. Because if you force me to sell it and I sold it, I'm getting money at least. But force me to give you a gift, even if I officially said yes, it's still Gezela. That's Rabbeinu Yoin's Yesoid, or that's the Rishonim Yesoid in L'Seder by Befara. If you're not giving him a choice, because he can't say no. You know what it's like? The Rambam in the Tshuva, Perek Daled Halacha Daled, it says, there are some things people don't do tshuva because they don't really do an Aveira. And he gives a mashal. I'll give a mashal in our terms. You know, when you're in yeshiva and your friend buys a Danish, says, give me a piece of your Danish. He doesn't want to give it to you. You know, it's Billy Kazais as it is. But you can't say no. You give him part of the Danish. Zok Ram, that's a suda she'enim aspekas labayla, and it's gezela. Even though he said yes, he gave it to you because he couldn't say no. Who could do tshuva on what they don't realize is an aveira? He said yes, but the yes is meaningless. This is a form understanding of a sird by befarach. You don't give him a choice, even though you are giving him a choice. You know, some say that's really the issa of Sayin Matanas Yichya, which is quoted by the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Halacha, because really, sometimes people give gifts, they don't want to give gifts. So then it's taking something that the person doesn't want to really give, and that is a avak of gezela. But this is the Havana of Leisirda. It's a Maisa Avdus. I mean, it's very nice, and you know, he's not an Eved, and you're not an Odain, but you really are. You're asking him, forcing him, what he doesn't want to do. I'll give you another example. Sometimes you go away, you hire a babysitter, usually it's not a very old girl. I'll be home at 10. You call her up, I'm sorry, I'm late, I'll be home at 11. Unless she's really, really maskim, so how could you do that? Even if you're paying her for the extra hour. But she wants to be home at 10, not at 11. You know, you're giving her a choice. I'll be home, okay, I hope it's okay. First of all, don't say that, ask her. And also, if she says no, is no. You know, the Stipler has a letter in Kraina, Beis Reish Samachei. It's incredible, you see the godless of the Stipler. It seems he hired a printer to do his work, to print his svarim, and then a chashuv person, doesn't say who, but a very chashuv person volunteered to do the work for free. So he said, the truth is, I would save a lot of money and have a big ola panasa with this printer, but I asked him if he's moichel, and he says, well, if you tell me moichel, I'll be moichel. So he said, I realize now he's not really moichel b'leiv shalom, and I don't want to be oivan like sir debay befarech, because he can't say no to me. He's talking about big money. He says, I have big agbas nefesh, you know, he says, but I can't do what's wrong. So he paid the money instead of taking a worker for free. And you think about stiples, every pruta, but that's an erlich hayid. You know, a person has a worker, and he says, please throw in this job. What does that mean, throw in this job? You throw an extra $100, I'll throw in this job. No, just throw in the job. But he's embarrassed to start handling. You know, you got to be careful. That might be besides the Chayshim Mishpat issue. That's like Seder by Befar. You know, someone asked me. So if someone asked me for a favor, I don't want to do it. Maybe if I do it, I'm over on the Fnei Evil Asita Michshel. I says, you know, you might be right. If he's over, you're over. So what's the Eitzah? Do it b'leiv shalom. But the one that's asking should not ask. Is Mamash out with Sugya. Another point that I think is worth the whole shiur for this point, the Chazon Ish, in a letter in Gimel Kuflam Medal and Igeres, he writes, a person should think twice, or maybe think 3 times, before he makes requests. You ask your wife, you ask your parents, you ask your in-laws, you ask the neighbor, you ask her something. And he says, we think there's nothing wrong with asking. What's wrong with asking? But then he writes a very uncharacteristic lashon. If someone asks constantly for favors, he's a soina v'sonui. He's a hater and hated. Now the Chazon Ish was very edel. What's wrong with asking for requests? So the truth is, we think, what's wrong with asking something? L'manasha. If he says yes, it's not good. If he says no, it's no. But I'll tell you, think about it. L'manasha, you're doing wrong. Why? If he says yes and he doesn't really mean it, alav min haTorah, let's say the by B'farach. If he says no, you know what really happens? He says no, and you're deep down upset. Why did he say no to me? I thought he's my friend. He's thinking, how could he have a chutzpah to ask me for that? That's so unreasonable. Where's his menschlichkeit? There you see the sign and the sunny all in one. So, Mamanashach, you lose. Now, what do I mean? You can't ask for a favor? You could. But two prerequisites. First of all, think before you ask. Is it really the right thing to ask? Can I live without it? But more importantly, give the person a way out. Don't say, please do this for me. That means you're telling him in a nice way. Say, you listen, I have something. If you can't do it, I understand perfectly. I really understand, but maybe you could help me. At least leave him a way out. But the Chazon Ish does not mention this law, but this is really the site of this law. You're not giving a way out. He can't say no. And you think about it, that's the mark of godless by us. Moshe Rabbeinu in Parshas Korach, Lo chamor echad mem nasasi, zaktet anchuma. I never asked for favors from Eden. We find the same thing in Shmuel Haramasi, in Shmuel Aleph, Perikut Beis, Pasuk Gimel, and in the Gemara Saita, Daf Yuramid Beis, Shimshon Agiba, when he was in real, he needed big schusim. He said, Rebbeinu Shalom, I led Klal Yisrael for 20 years. I never once asked anybody for even to carry my stick for me. Our Pam used to say, he never let us do anything for him. He said, Alain is rain. Now, of course, we all know the Gemara, it's in Pasuk and Shulchan Aruch, you should let your Talmud be mishamash you, but you're better off Alain is rain. Don't, people like to, ask for favors and, mamanashach, it's a fakert to mamanashach. Another question that we began with, you have a worker, let's say during COVID, and there was no teaching, could you ask the Rebbe to do some fundraising? So this is a big chayshim mishpat sugi, you should know. But as far as our sugi, it also has a relevance. The Magen Avram in Kuf Samach Tes, beginning of Kuf Samach Tes, quotes a Shla Kodesh that says that if you make up with the worker that you want to do, that he'll do whatever you want him to do, that's part of the contract, you even what the Teres Kanim says, the Avodas Perach, but if you make up with him, you can even ask to tie your shoes, as I state in the Shla. Zog to Magen Avram, I don't know, why does he have to come on to that? Why do you have to have a Tanai? Today we don't have an Eved Ivri. There's B'chlal no Issa of Leisirdim. So without a Tanai, you could ask the worker to carry you, to put your shoes on for you. In other words, the Magen Avram is saying there's no Issa B'zman Hazeh. Zog to Chsam Seifa on the Gillian, Tzarech Ian Gadol, from Bava Metzia Ayin Gimel. And that's mamish the beauty of our sugya. Apparently the Magen Avram went with the pashtus that it's totally an Eved, and there's no Eved today. But the Chasam Sofer is reminding us there's a sugya in Bava Metzia, there's a pasuk memvav that is an issa even by a non-Eved. And that's why, again, the Magen Avram is mekel, maybe and the Chinuch is mekel. But as we saw, the Gemara, Rishonim, Poiskim, Heintige Poiskim, we saw Chazon Ish, a Steipler, that we have to be choishish very much that there's still a lav leisirda by a regular yid. And that's why Lamaisa, just because you hired a worker and you don't want to, waste money, so you make him do something else, it has to conform with Hilchas Payalim. A work that's below his dignity is also, that's leisirda. Besides maybe in Chosh Mishpat, he's not mechuyev to work anything. The Sefer Chassidim and Tafsaf, Reish, Ayin Dalet, writes how you're supposed to treat a worker. Don't be matriach them more than you have to, and don't ask them what they don't want to do. The Yosef Oimer that I mentioned earlier in page 288, 289, 290, he writes his father's Hanhaga that he never asked for a favor. He would say instead, Ritzoincha, would you like to? Never ask directly. That's a Zahiris in this lav. The point is that a person that is not giving someone a choice is basically forcing him, and that's what the Issav Leisird is. I saw a Shaila from one of the Kadmoinim, one of the earliest Achroinim, the Mary Brunna, in the Tshuva Simon Reish Mem Beis, had a Shaila where someone sent his Misharsis to go shopping for him. And she refused. Said, I don't want to go on the street. Kol Kfud Bas Melech Panima. So the Mary Brunna says, she's right. You can't force a Misharsis to go on the street. She works in the house, not in the street. And he says there's a pasuk in the Torah. He quotes a Das Zekain, we can all look it up. In Parshas Mishpat, on the pasuk, don't send this girl, this Amma Ivris, in the street. You hire her to work, let her work, but not to go on the street. So someone asked Rav Vosden Chelik Yud Aleph Siman Shin Lamed Hey. But today they go out all the time anyhow, so what's wrong? He says, well, if she doesn't go out and she's conforming with Tznius V'Yis Darf to Zayin and she's living Kol Kvuda, you can't force her. Just because people do it doesn't mean it's right. And he writes, even today you can't send the secretary shopping. That's a violation of Tznius. If it's her level, again, of course, if she goes out for everything else but for you, then maybe there's no heta part to refuse. But if she doesn't go out for herself, then that's a breach of this Issa. Ma'isa Shahaya, there was someone, a very prominent person, not choshev, but prominent, had a lot of money. He made a simcha, and after simcha he walked out and left the shul, total disarray. So, I don't know who it was, the president told the building manager, you clean up. That's wrong. The building manager is mechuyev to manage the building, not to become a waiter or waiters or a whole crew. So that would be leiser debay. Now, if in the contract is you have to do whatever I tell you to do, so and the person signs and he accepts that, no, that's his contract. But otherwise, this is an issa of leiser. A common question is, can I tell my child or my grandchild to help me? I'm worried about that. Can I tell my Talmud? So this is a Beferish Gemara. Which Gemara? Bav Metzia Ayin Gimel Amid Beis. We saw earlier that fascinating Gemara that you're allowed to deal with an inchi d'loy maili, avoidas perach. That's a Gemara. Now, what exactly means inchi d'loy maili? The Radvaz on the Rambam says, what does that mean? So the Meiri that I told you, that I mentioned earlier, Bnei Adam apchusim umezulzolim b'yoysa, the Rabbeinu Yonasan on that Gemara says, zoyel ubasa oisai v'yayin. In other words, people that are basically, we call them today OTD, off the derech. So the Gemara is saying you're allowed to take him and make him a human horse. Now what's the cheshbon? It's very pashut. If he's running the streets, he's going to end up making more and more trouble. Anybody knows, dealing with these people, get them to work physically. Get them to spend all their energy in working. So the Paiskim explain, it's not because he's not a mensch, he's a yid. But it's l'toyeles shaloi. Instead of running the streets, be an expression of kavod HaTorah. And you're going to need a lot of energy, that's what they're good with. And they'll utayaltam. This is an example of loisirda litoyeles. You know, we have Lashon Hara toyeles. And I got it once, Rabbi Chanan, and Kaivetz Ha'aretz, and Yevamos Simenayin, has a whole list of things that are mutter l'toyeles. L'mashal. Now I'd hit another yid. But there's a mitzvah to hit your child, at least before America was discovered. Right? What's pshat? L'toyeles is mutter. So I'm going to add to Rabbi Chanan's list. There's another toyeles, and that is leisir debay. But the yemes is, you find this minei yubei. There's in the Frankel Mafteach, on our Rambam, he quotes to say, if I don't have base kale, that says, let's say you have a worker that there's no work to do. So you can't give him another job just to keep him busy. But let's say you're doing it because you're afraid that by him sitting around, he's going to end up getting into trouble. Let him make him work just for no reason. And his mamish this yisoid. Leisir l'toyeles is mutter. Now let's go a step further. In the Mechilta in Parshas Mishpatim, on the pasuk Shei Shanim Tavai, to work with an Eved Ivri, the Mechilta adds, you can't work with an Eved Ivri, Avoidas Eved, right? Ava Babanayu Talmidai Rashoi, with your son or Talmud is mutter. And the emes we see this. There's a Gemara in Ksubis, an incredible Gemara. Of Tzadik Vav, it's Gepaskin Yardei Reish Mem Beis Yotes. And I say this in Yeshiva quite often to remind the boys where they're holding, that you're allowed to make your Talmud do Avodas Eved Kanani and put on your shoes. Kol Malachasha Eved, which means Kanani Oisel Rabbi, Talmud Oisel Rabbi. It's Mamish Gemara Ksubis. So the Mechilt is saying the Isav Leisir does not apply to a Benai or a Talmidai. What happened to Leisirda? There's very positive. This is Dr. Chaim Kanievsky in his Pirish and Masechta Avodim. The heta of Talmud and Bnai is a toyeles. Because really he's not giving, he's getting. He's getting more than he's giving. He's getting kibbutz, kvoid rabbi, kvoid amakim, it's all the same. So Reb Chaim is learning that the heta of B'nai and Talmidai is based on Bava Metzia L'Tayeles. But I want to make a point also, and that is that it's not a unlimited heta. Because if you look in the Heilig Chassam Soifa in Bava Metzia and Gimel Amud Beis, he says, yes, a parent, a Rebbe, could make the child do avodas emotional abuse, and he learned. And mamash, it's meduyik in the mechilta. Mechilta says you're allowed to work with an eved avodas eved. You're not allowed to work with an eved avodas eved, but with B'nai Tamid is mutter. The heta is what you need. He needs to tie in his shoes. He's very old. But stam abusing a child, there's no heta. So it has to go, of course, both ways. Respect for parents and respect for children. Not kabir es bincha ves bitecha, like it says in the new version of Kaseres HaDibros. But it's k'void ha'adam. So, Mechaba also says in Reish Mem, Yotes Osalad Mahachbid Oilay Albana, don't overimpose children. It's a very delicate balance. But what a parent needs, you need it. And lav dafka parents, probably grandparents also, because although it's less of a mitzvah than keep it up, but it's enough of a mitzvah. I mean, don't forget, the Mechaba says a Rebbe in a Talmud can even do Avodas Evet Kanani, even putting on shoes. So, of course, everybody has to work to making things work. There has to be a relationship between parents and children. But the point is that parents have the right to ask children to do things for them. Now, the child says, I can't do it. I really don't want to do it. It's avodas perech, evet, nothing doing. There's no such heta. Now, again, also, parents have to understand that the child is a human being also. My Shresh Hanarach once told me, someone came to Chavetz Chaim and he was like abusing his child. He goes, but Rebbe, it's mine kind. Because it's not true. He says, if you're walking in the street and your dog does damage, you have to pay. But if you're walking in the street and your child does damage, you're potter. You know why? Dein Hund is deine. Your dog is yours. Your child is not yours. So you're not mechuyven his damages. You have to hear both sides of the story to make things work. But here, regarding our sugya, this is the concept. There's a heta l'te'eles, and there's a heta of b'nai v'talmida. It's also mutter. And I want to mention Rav Vozna in Mibeis Levi Chelik Yud Aleph Amud Kuf Mem Daled says, but with a spouse, with a wife, there's no heta. It's only a parent with a child. His mashal is very strange to me. He says, if the husband wants the wife to do extra cleaning on Pesach that she doesn't want to do, and she's afraid to say no, so the husband's oivel, I see it the way before. The way I know people, it's usually fakir. The wife makes the husband do the unnecessary cleaning. So either way you do it. But what he says is there's no het to husband and wife. Because in our ksub we wrote, ana oika. The eflach means not I'm going to make her work, I'm going to work. Right? But this what he says is only you had the son and parent, not spouse, one to the other. Grada, it's a little tempting when you have family, to exert oneself. I saw a Dava Nifla. Chaim Kanievsky is quoted, "The Ma'ase Ish Cheli Beis Kufayin Hey." Someone asked the Chazon Ish, "Why did Torah allow the whole concept of an Evet Kanani? Why do we have to have a guy in our house?" So the Chazon Ish, with his tremendous understanding of the human emotion, he says, because people have a tendency, they have to be a boss, and they have to, show that they're calling the shots. So the Baruch Shem gave it an outlet. Take an Evet Kanani and do what you want. But today we don't have Evet Kananis, and we take out our frustration of being a boss on our wife, children, and friends. Now that's really mamish our sugya. That's the danger of it. You could ask someone to do something, you force them to do it. But there's no heta, unless, of course, b'nai v'talmida, and even that has to be done properly. Of course, if someone has a boarder in his house, he has a relative that's staying by him, so you like to treat her like family, but that's not yet family. You have to be more careful with an outsider, even if it's a niece or a relative. There's a special heta by a b'nai v'talmida. There is a heta b'mokay mitzvah. What does that mean? Can I approach a gevir and say, you must give me kach v'kach money? Let's say you have a shul needs a center and someone's walking by. Well, you must come make a minyan. But he can't. You're forcing him, he feels guilty, he comes. Is there a special heta b'mokim mitzvah? So one thing I'll tell you, whenever you're doing a potential issa, make sure it's really mutter. Rav Sternbuch in the Tshuvas Aleph Tafkov Mem quotes the Briskerov that was very nizah never to ask anybody for anything because of Rabbeinu Yoina's concern of befarach. So if you have a mitzvah, you got to make sure it's a mitzvah. But one thing what I think came out is that if it's a mitzvah that the other person is mechuyev to do, so you're helping him do his mitzvah. L'mashal, someone's not learning. Tell him, come to the shir, come to the shir. Come on, you got to learn. So even if you're the Maggid Shir, if you're not doing it for your own covet, you're doing it for him. And he's mechuyev to learn. That's a chesed for him. He's gaining. What he's mechuyev to do, you find in Shulchan Aruch, if someone is not giving enough tzedakah, you're allowed to force him to give the minimum amount. But it also says in Shulchan Aruch, to force a person to give more than he wants to give, based on Gemara and Bava Basra, is also. So the point seems to be, the chiluk mitzvah chiyuvis, you force him to do a mitzvah chiyuv that he has to do, that's okay. Mitzvah kiyum is, if he doesn't do it, he's not oiva. Is he mechuyev to be your center? He has to go to work. You want to make a minyan, so get a minyan. Or wait for another person to come. So you have to be, a little intellectually honest with yourself. Is he mechuyev to do it? Am I doing him a favor or doing myself a favor? To push a gevir to give more because you want more, he's giving his amount of ma'isa. You want him to give it to you instead of someone else? That is not included in the heta of dvar mitzvah. Another interesting shaila, someone here, he was a frumma. Usually frum and krum is pretty similar. He says if a teacher or rebbe gives a homework or an assignment, they're oivel asir by befarach. For me, it's mamish avodas perach, and I'm afraid to do it because I'm oiva on lefnei iva. So I told him, use your lumbus in better ways. This is chinuch, this is tayeles, and even if you're getting a punishment assignment, so you have an eitzah. Instead of lefnei iva, don't misbehave and don't get an assignment. But even if it's right 100 times over, I will not misbehave. So I would tell the Rebbe, the teacher, better give an assignment that's more constructive, write a shtickle Torah about the importance of midas. But we don't tell Rebbeim what to do. They're on the front lines, and we shouldn't be telling them what to do. But avad, there is no issa on homework and assignments. The question we began with regarding svarim, and I saw in Rav Derech Sich Rab Chaim in Chelik Aleph Shin Tzadik Tes, he says in the time the Rav Nochem Meir Karelitz hung up a sign in the Koilel Chazinish. If you don't put back your sefer, and the Gabi has to do it, you're over on the lav, the raisa, v'asir the b'farach. What I saw recently goes back to Rav Nochem Meir Karelitz. I also saw this in the Bir Halacha, that's the B'yam Zilba's son, in Panovich, in Tov Shin Yud Zayin. Someone put up a sign, the same sign. And of course there was a tumult, but you could tumult all you want until you learn the sugya. Now we have a Gemara in Bava Metzia, we have many Rishonim, Beinu Yoina, Archa Sadikim, Re'im, Rashi, many Poiskim, that this is a perfect example. Because by leaving a sefer on the table, the Gabbai is forced to do what he doesn't want to do. Now someone says, but the Gabbai gets paid. So first of all, so why are you wasting yeshiva money? Put it back yourself. Also, I'm not sure he's excited about putting back all your svarim. And the third, in many places, it's a volunteer. In yeshiva, there's a rotation. So besides the other avlas, and there are plenty of other avlas, the stipends, midat chazarius v'resha, it's a violation of Be'ach Kamoicha, and the Baron says, based on a Gemara at the end of Megillah, if someone is oiche sefer Torah oram, nikfa oram. Nikfa oram? Nikfa oram oisa mitzvah. If you do a mitzvah and b'shas ma'isa, you mavazer the mitzvah, you touch the sefer Torah, you lose the mitzvah. The Baron says, using a sefer, not putting it back, is mavazer the sefer and mavazer the tzibah, and Khalil, I don't want to say the rest of it. So there are plenty of reasons to put back svarim, but the main reason is, you learn Torah, you have to live Torah. Besides the many Yisurim, Pashit, the Ben Adam Chaveir, the Menschlichkeit, the Bezoyin of Svarim. I think the Besaran says, Yamachz in the Shamat, you put back the Svarim, Yamachz in the Shamat where it belongs, so you have to do things right. Rav Sternbuch and that Tshuva brings a Ma'isa Shahaya. Rabbi Chanan was sitting with the Chazon Ish by a Simcha, and Rabbi Chanan wanted the Chazon Ish to speak. And the Chazon Ish never spoke. So he said no. He asked him again no. Then Rabbi Chanan said, I don't think I'm oivel leisir the befarach if I ask you to speak. The Chazon Ish says, I'm not sure. And Rabbi Chanan shot back and he asked Mechila profusely. The truth is the Chazon Ish L'Shita Asay that writes in the Sefer that's the Leisir Debay. I don't want to speak. Why push me to speak? So it was a little shared. What about Rabbi Chanan? So I saw Rabbi Shlomo Zalman. Ahayavach says a beautiful pshat. Shalach l'maisa. People that like to speak, what makes it even more geschmack when they say no and you force them, you push them. Rabbi Chanan was a speaker, so he didn't mind. But for the Chazon Ish, it was a pain. So it's like, it's like the Baal Tefillah. You want to down for the Amid? And he says, no. If you say, okay, I'll get someone else, he'll fall apart. So basically, if the fellow wants to speak, push him. If he doesn't want to speak, don't push him. And the Chazon Ish was the wrong person to push to speak. They once, stories told, they once said, just say 3 words. And the Chazon Ish was horrified. He says, just 3 words? If I tell an Isha, Hareyat Mikudeshes, even without the Li, according to many Rishonim, she's Mikudeshes. Gans Hilchas Kedushin, Gans Hilchas Gerishin, Gans Eishes Ish with 3 words, and you say just 3 words? So the Chazon Ish was not a speaker, obviously. So for him, Itaka was a Sir Debay Befarach. Grada, if someone doesn't want to be about Tefillah, don't push him to be about Tefillah, same thing. Someone wants to have an easy Shabbos, he calls someone the last minute, would you like to have 7 guests for Shabbos, Friday morning? A big candidate, or Sir Debay Befarach. If a parent doesn't feel well and talk at the last moment, they feel they can't stay home, so call the child. That's what children are for, and hope they'll do it b'leiv shalom. But stam just to throw around the parent card or chesed card, be very, very careful. It's hard to mention all the questions, but I think one point I do want to mention, and that is, this is basically seichel in his har b'kvoit chavreichem. We deal with people in shul, at work, family, children, grandchildren, spouses. So much of the hatzlacha is when we think before we ask for things. And I must mention the importance of chinuch habonim. Our children don't hear enough about midas b'chlal, but whoever hears about leisir debay befarach, thinking about asking, treating a worker with respect. My house, I don't like the word worker, a friend. This is our friend. Try to train them to see the tzelem of in every person. A worker, a driver, it's all friends. Why do I say this? Because someone came over to me the other day and I'm thankful to him. He said, I guess he saw the sign talking about this Issa. I want to tell you a story or two. He says, the other day I was in a shoe store. There was a young child and there was an old man working trying to sell him a shoe. And the young child, he probably was in a single digits. He tells the old man, tie my shoes for me. So he said, I'll tell you a different story. Rabbi Yash was 102 years old, and Rebbe couldn't put on his shoes for himself. And it bothered him that his aunt got to put on his shoes for him. So what he did is at least he picked up his foot to do something. So here you have a prince in single digits, and you have a 102-year-old Gadol Hador that lived Torah. But wait, he didn't finish. I have another story, he says. But the Haviyovdi tells me, he was in a shul, and he sat down to daven. A young child comes over and says, get out of my seat, my makom kavua. So he said, fine, he's here with the board, the vice board. He says, okay, I'm not going to start up with this. The Rav saw this and was horrified. My shul, such an avla. He goes over to the father and he says, I'm sorry to tell you, but your son told this, get out of my seat, makom kavua. So the father says, he's right, it's a makom kavua. So he says, you know why this happened? I'll tell you another story. He said that a boy met a girl for shidduch, and the boy was talking very, impolite and very disrespectful, and it bothered the girl so much he told the father, and the father was so hurt he called the Rosh Yeshiva. And he says, a boy from Yeshiva met my daughter, and he spoke like this. So Rosh Yeshiva says, it's my fault. He goes, why is it your fault? He says, because he came to me last week, he says he has to go out on a shidduch. He never did this before. What does he do? So I told him, just talk with the girl the way your father talks to your mother. Malach, but it's a bitter gelechte. This is the chinuch that some people give at home. But the midah taiva meruba, if we give our children a chinuch, how to treat another yid, how to treat a worker, how to treat a driver with respect, it will, some things are not taught, they're caught. That's the chinuch that we need. I'm going to talk to you all. Not
Oh, Rabbi Smith, the ganze Teure in ein Schock, in 9 Haare. B'Shem English Teure, we'd like to thank our Rabbi Yakov Zev Smith for the wonderful shir. Rabbi said we need sponsors. If you could please help have a schus without Leisida by Beforach. You have a schus for the Talmud Torah, the Rabbi, you want to come and sponsor. Call English Teure 718-851-8651. Tiskra Mitzvahs. B'Chem Rakasha Oime. Rotsa Kodesh Baruch Hu Lezaka says Yisrael. Lefikach hebelem Torah mitzvah. Shnema the nechavos metzidka yagel Torah v'yade. Kaddish.
Amen.
Schmeiß die Küche die Ehe. Ja, aber große Beschwerden, große Nachbarn, da mir die Augen wegen. Oh nein. Also so, weil wir laut mit deinem Kommandant meisen, die da von dein Polizei sagt. Ja, nun der Haus Nummer da Kinder zu lachen, keine Sinne wie bei. Das ist mein war oh nein. Ich habe mich mal kein Timeline Polizei really. Oh nein. Das ist schon, weil wir brauchen ja so rein. Polizei really oh nein.